Yeah, welcome back. Today is our ninth lecture in the in our first course in optimization, and I am going to continue with the and complete the topic of vector norms today. I thought I will give you the reference from where I am teaching, and I am teaching actually this is section 2.2 from matrix computation by Jean Golub and Van Loon. This is my key source material on which I have based this section. Now, if you recap what we did in the last class, we derived Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, or in other words, we showed that x transpose y divided by length of x, Euclidean distance of x, times the Euclidean distance of x is x1 square plus x2 square up to xn square to the power half square root of that. Uh, uh, so cos of theta is x transpose y divided by length of x times the length of y. So in other words, x and y are scaled down to unit length vectors, and then the dot product between the two is essentially the cosine of the angle between the two vectors. So theta is the angle between x and y vectors. So two vectors are orthogonal if theta is 90 degree. So therefore x transpose y will be 0. And orthogonal vectors have a very important place in matrix algebra, optimization, and many other places. Today, now I am going to, I had said earlier that, in the three properties of the norm, in particular, the non-trivial part is always proving the triangular inequality. And so at least I should do one example today, and I'm going to do it for the second norm. And followed by that, I'm going to focus on equivalence of norms. And in all of them, you would see nice embedded optimization problems, which I am trying to bring out to you as I proceed. So we say that this x of alpha is a norm. Here in my case, the x of alpha is a alpha norm, like one alpha could be 1, 2, or infinity, for example. And x of beta is another norm. So like if it could be again 1, 2, or infinity, but different from alpha. So what equivalence of norm means is that in this case, for example, the beta norm, x of norm of beta, is always bounded by by on the lower side by c1 times the norm of x norm of alpha, and on the upper side by c2 times the norm of x norm of alpha, where c1 and c2 are some positive constants. So for example, here I have specifically listed down what happens. For example, one norm, and do you recall what the one norm was? One norm is mod of a norm of absolute value of x1 plus absolute value of x1 to x value of xn. This is the first norm, is of any vector. On the when you compare it with the second norm, then let's say for example it's a 100-dimensional vector, you are looking at R100. Then for any vector x, its first norm between 10 times. On the upper side, it could go as much as 10 times of x2, and on the lower side, it would be as low as the second norm of x2. So that means on the lower side, first norm and second norm could be same. In fact, if you look at it, you would see this this thing I have shown here for all three of them. That lower side bound is that independent of the norm, they could be same. On the upper side, however, like for example, if x2 is 1, okay, like let's say the second norm is it's a unit vector in second norm, then in first norm it could be as much as under root of 100, which is 10 times of 1. So in the first norm, uh, uh, the vector may give a length of 10, but in the second norm, the vector is having only a length of 1. So this is what these constants imply. Now the word equivalence, you may be thinking why we are referring to this as equivalence of norms. The word equivalence is coming from the fact that if a vector grows, let's say in x2 norm, suppose the vector grows, then it means the lower bound also grows and the upper bound also grows. So then it also means that in the first norm also this vector is growing. Conversely, if suppose a vector is shrinking in x2 norm, then the upper bound also reduces and the lower bound also reduces. So the first norm also the vector will reduce. So this subjectiveness, this subjective equivalence is what is being mentioned here. In particular, in any norm, a vector goes to 0, then for example, x2 it goes to 0, it will also go to 0 in x1 norm also. So therefore, when we talk of convergence of vectors, it doesn't matter in which norm we prove the convergence, but more about that later on. Let's now come to the first thing first. Let's do the triangular inequality for second norm. Triangular inequality for second norm. So what is it that we have to prove? Given two vectors x and y in Rn, we want to show that length of x plus y vector is bounded on the above by length of x plus length of y. This is your in two-dimensional illustration. This is x, this is y, and this is x plus y. So the maximum value that it can take is when if it becomes equality, then what does it mean? It means x plus y is equal to length of x plus length of y, which is actually the case in two dimension when the vectors are collinear, right? Or theta is 0 degrees. Fine. Now this geometrical intuition, let's take it to the n dimension. So let me take the square of the length of x plus y, or in other words, x plus y transpose x plus y, which is same as x transpose x plus y transpose y plus 2 x transpose y, which is same as length of the square of x vector plus the length of the norm of y vector square of the norm of y vector. And for 2x transpose y, I am going to use the angle identity or the Cauchy squares identity which I derived earlier and write it as 2 times length of x into length of y into cos of theta. Now if I am trying to maximize this, given that x and y have certain length, what is my variable here? The variable that I can do is changes basically theta. So the maximization is being done over theta, given that x vector has some say length of 5, y vector has some length of 2, whatever, and you are trying to maximize it. Now you know that cos theta is bounded from -1 to +1. So if you want to maximize the RHS, because this is greater than 0, this is also greater than 0, greater than 0, greater than 0, greater than 0. So if I want to maximize it, what should I do to cos theta? I should take it to the maximum value, or bring cos theta to 1 or theta to 0. So the max that I can go is on this is when I take theta equal to 0. So the right hand side becomes x square plus norm of x square plus norm of y squared plus 2 times norm of x, norm of y, which is nothing but norm of x plus second norm of x plus second norm of y whole square. So therefore, we get that maximum value of x plus y, norm of x plus y is norm of x plus norm of y. In other words, norm of x, second norm of x plus y vector is always less than or equal to norm of second norm of x vector plus second norm of y vectors. In fact, vector norms, and there are also matrix norms, all of them are framed as maximization and minimization problems. Those are your examples of maximization and minimizations in matrix algebra. Now, I will leave it to you as homework. Prove that triangular prove triangular inequality for first norm and infinity norm. This is your own exercise now. Now let us move to proving the equivalence relationship, and in particular I am going to show equivalence relationship on the very first example, equivalence of first norm and second norm. So I will show this one, I will prove it, and the others I will leave it to you as homework exercise. See, these matrix inequalities, when you try to give these less bounds, they themselves can be framed as optimization problems. So in particular, now I am trying to prove that bound on the first norm of x is on the lower side same identical to second norm of x, on the higher side it can grow up to under root of n times where the vector is in Rn times the second norm of x. So why not I fix x to a unit length vector? So I am going to fix the in second norm in Euclidean distance. I am going to fix x1 square plus x2 square up to xn square to 1. Now you see how I am framing the optimization problem, how I am modeling it. Now suppose I am trying to focus on proving this upper bound. So then what should I be doing? I should be maximizing the first norm, which is saying that maximize x1 plus x2 plus x3 up to xn. And I can already hear you raising objection saying that it is modulus of x1 plus modulus of x2 and modulus of xn. Fine, agreed. So what I am going to do is I am going to stipulate instead that x1 is greater than or equal to 0, x2 is greater than or equal to 0, and xn is greater than or equal to 0. Because if such is the case with xi variables, then I don't need to apply the modulus condition above, and this is important because I want to use differentiability and find out the stationary point. So modulus function doesn't help there. Now whether it is positive or negative, x1 square, x2 square, xn square are always greater than or equal to 0. So I think it's easy for us to see or convince ourselves that this is not at all any restrictive assumption that I have done. So this becomes my say the problem Pmax that I should try to solve. And if I solve this problem, then I think I will get this inequality. I will be able to prove. Alternatively, for the I'm sorry, for minimization Pmax, you could write minimize another optimization problem like this, subject to the same set of constraints. The constraints are same, xn square is equal to 1, But only thing is, you are trying now to uh, uh, minimize the objective function rather than maximize the objective function. Okay, let's start playing with it. Let me start with the first problem now. Uh, the Pmax problem. Let me try to solve. All right. You would say now, and I can see this problem may look daunting to you at the first glance. You may say you have a linear, you will carefully observe and say that, oh, it has a linear objective function, which I like, but it has a quadratic inequality, a nonlinear inequality, and also bounds which are inequality constraints. So these bounds are also inequality constraints. Now, to find the optimal, I should know, you would argue to me that to find the optimal, I should know which of these, which of these are at zero, which of these are at zero. Unless I know that, how can I proceed? This is what may come to your mind. So here, I am going to use a hunch, and this is how you solve, problems. Even algorithms are iterative. Iterative algorithms also basically start with the initial point, which is your hunch, and then every iteration keep on improving the solution. So it's always, whenever you say start with the initial guess, it's actually like a hunch only. So here I am going to take a hunch. I'm going to start with the hunch that maybe all of them are going to be greater than 0. This is also a simplifying hunch and also a hunch at the same time. So I'm going to assume that all of these variables are greater than 0. If all of these variables are greater than 0, then actually these inequalities are becoming, these bounds are becoming redundant. So even if I don't model them, I'm not going to have any problem. So my problem will become, and I'll explain this what I mean in just a few minutes. My problem is going to become maximize modulus of x1 square plus x2 square up to xn square is equal to 1. See, suppose you are in 2 dimension, all right, and both x1 and x2 are greater than 0. So suppose you are optimally, suppose going, your hunch is that optimal is going to be somewhere here. Now, what do our objective function is f of x, and we are trying to maximize the f of x. So if it is at it is at maximum, then it means that uh, so in a 3 dimension you can try to visualize a bump somewhere here like this, a spherical kind of you are at x1 x2, you think of it like a spherical top or something like that, and it is sitting at the maximum. Then two things happen, right? First thing is that because we are dealing with differentiable functions, at the maximum or minimum, the partial derivative with x is 0. This is also known as Fermat's theorem, and so far I am using this, that optimal is a stationary point. I have not given you a proof, but I am I know you, most of you know a bit about it, so I'm creating examples around it. After some time I prove it. So the gradient should be should be 0, and you move anywhere in its vicinity in a small enough neighborhood delta. If in a small enough neighborhood, if you move, you will find that, I mean, there will exist such a neighborhood. You will find that f of x in that neighborhood is always greater than or equal to f of x of star. I mean, in a single dimensional kind of example, this is a maximum point, for example, here. So in a small enough neighborhood, everywhere this function is, for example, uh, uh, I'm sorry, what did I write? It's maximum. So f of x of star is greater than or equal to f of x for x coming in the small enough neighborhood, which is here like a interval, which is here at the maximum. So function is reducing here in this particular case around the vicinity. So calculus is about only small enough neighborhood. If calculus is only about small enough neighborhood and you have already created a distance from your boundaries, then you just have to make sure that the neighborhood does not touch the boundaries. Then in optimality conditions, how does the come into play, these inequalities come into play? They don't come into play. That's why I say they become redundant, or more appropriately, I say they become relaxed. These notions will become more firmer as we proceed. Now let me again come back to this problem. So I have my hunch. By hunch, I have now created a problem of maximizing linear objective function subject to only one equality constraint, which is that x1 square plus x2 square plus xn square is equal to n. Now, this Fermat's theorem, which says that gradient should be zero at or a stationary point is either maxima, minima, has to be a stationary point. This condition is only for unconstrained problem. But what is my problem here? My problem here is of one equality constraint. So I will convert this to an unconstrained problem by writing xn square as 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square plus xn minus 1 square to the square and square root of that. So I am going to write xn as square root of 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square, and substitute this in the objective function here. So my objective function now becomes maximize x1 plus x2 and xn minus 1 plus 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square root of half. And I'll write here below max exactly what variables I am dealing with. x1, x2 up to xn minus 1. These are the variables which I have to set. So this is the objective function f. So what does the stationary point require? Max has to be a stationary point, and there are more conditions, but the necessary condition is that it has to be a stationary point, unconstrained one. So this should be 0, second partial derivative should be 0, and the partial derivative with n minus 1 should also be 0. So let us take derivative of f, the objective function. This whole thing is my f of x1, x2 to xn minus 1 with respect to some variable x of I. So then from here, I will get, there is somewhere here the term x of I. So I'll get a 1 coming from here. And the other place, I will have to apply chain rule. So x to the power half's derivative is half of square root of x. So therefore 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square to the power half. And then when I take derivative in the chain rule from here, the minus 1 will come out because of this minus, and for xi square 2xi will come out, and this should be equal to 0, which means that 1 minus xi divided by whole of this thing here. Okay, let me write it once. I'm sorry. 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square to the power half should be equal to 0. So I can write this as 1 minus x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square. I mean, I'm taking whole of this term to the right hand side here, and then moving it up to the numerator and squaring it. So therefore, this should become equal to x I square, xi square, and I is varying from 1 to n minus 1. So therefore, if you write for x equal to 1, I equal to 1, you will get 2x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 square is equal to 1. If you take I equal to 2, you will get x1 square plus 2x2 square up to xn minus 1 square equal to 1, and so on up to last one. You will get x1 square plus x2 square up to 2xn minus 1 square to be equal to 1. So if I write this in a matrix format, this is going to be 2, 2, 1, and so on up to 1, 1, 2, so on up to 1, go down, go down, go down, 1, 1 up to 2 times n minus 1 cross n minus 1 matrix x2 square up to xn minus 1 square, I'm sorry, xn minus 1 square to be equal to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Now, do you see the symmetry in this problem? From this symmetry of the structure of this A matrix, if you look at this as solving Ax equal to B, you can very quickly say that x1 square equal to x2 square equal to xn minus 1 square. You can easily say that. And I am going to add one more thing, that this should also be equal to xn square. Why? Because, see, in this case, I eliminated the variable xn and substitute from the equality constraint. From the equality constraint, I eliminated variable xn and substituted it in the objective function. I could have done it for any variable. I could have done it for x1 also. Now, because of that, at the optimality, the answer will not change. So if that is the case, then all of them will have to be identical. So these are some nice symmetry arguments. You should think a bit more carefully about it, but they are correct arguments. And so I will get x1 square plus x2 square up to xn minus 1 whole square equal to xn square, which basically means that because x1 square plus x2 square up to xn square is 1, which basically means that each of these xi squares is 1 by n, or x1 is equal to x2 is equal to xn is equal to 1 by under root of n. Negative I cannot take because I have xi is to be greater than 0. And so then what becomes the first norm of x1? The first norm of x1 actually becomes summation of all of them, which is n by under root of n, which is equal to under root of n which is exactly the bound, which I had written. Where did I write that bound? I have to go really up. Huh? Yeah. So which is exactly the bound which I had written here. Is it not? So I have actually found out the upper bound. Now you may say how it is not minimum. Of course, in this particular case, since I have already written it, it's quite. So formats condition that the gradient vector should be first theorem, which says that necessary condition should be equal to 0. The stationary point condition is applicable to maxima as well as minima. So we need some other way to check whether we are at the maximum or minimum. We need one of some other way to do it. There are second order necessary conditions, and then there are second order sufficiency conditions also, and I would be deriving it later on. But now let me look at the let me eliminate that this cannot be minimum by actually showing the lower bound in this particular problem. So what I need to show now is that the lower bound is actually x2 itself. So to do that, I write this as, I now go by normal definition, yeah, of the norm, first norm, and then look at the square of it, which is the square of this, which is like looking at this square plus this square up to this square, and then 2 times all possible second combinations between modulus of xi and modulus of xj, summing over I equal to 1 to n, j equal to 1 to n, and I not equal to j. Because I equal to j conditions, I have x1 square, x2 square, and xn square I have already derived here. So then this tells me that x1 square is going to be equal to, I mean the first norm square is going to be equal to second norm square plus 2 times this particular term. But look at it, this is greater than or equal to 0 being modulus. This is greater than or equal to being modulus. So when I do how many summations I am doing, approximately n square minus n summations, all of those terms will be greater than or equal to 0 plus something which is going to come here, which is greater than or equal to 0. That means to square of the second norm, I have to add a non-negative number, and then I will get the square of the first norm. So it is very clear then that this is going to be greater than or equal to x2 square, or by taking positive square root, I can write like this. So then I have got that on the lower side, it is bounded by, I'm sorry, on the, what did I write? I have got that on the lower side, the one norm is bounded by the second norm. So obviously then what I got on the other side becomes the upper bound, and that proves the statement. Now, just for example, lower bound is, this is trivial for all of them. It is trivial to show that there is one such vector. For example, you just look at 1 0 0 0 0 and look at its second norm. What is it? It is 1. You look at this 1 0 0 0 0 and look at its first norm. What is it? It is 1. So it is identical, is it not? So that is what it amounts to saying. So we will close this lecture here today. Thank you.